Good evening. You're listening to the Xtreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob. Alongside me tonight from the Great Midwest is RDV, and we're taking a look at an early 1980s Australian thriller starring Jamie Lee Curtis, and of course, a guy that we don't talk nearly enough about, in Stacy Keach, called Roadgames. And RDV, you're up there in the Great Midwest, back when the American interstate system really exploded after World War II, let's say, and led to family vacations and movies like the name Vacation with Chevy Chase in '83, a great one. For generation, people have been traveling East Coast to West Coast and opened up a lot of doors to things, but somehow, some way, the subculture of truck driver films, cab films from the 70s and 80s, like whether it was Duel or other things we've talked about on the Extreme Movie Show, we don't really mention a lot the significance of what was going on in the 70s and 80s in Australia, of all places. Um, hours away from us, if you watch a sporting event, it was delayed or whatever. So it was really,
Yeah.
really kind of tough. It was kind of like in the middle of nowhere until cable got really big. But I'm telling you, this little movie is a thriller, not a slasher. Jamie Lee Curtis, obviously fresh off her Halloween stint and getting roles in slasher movies, was a big name star of the American version because the Australians wanted to cast Stacy Keach in it. Stacy Keach is just phenomenal. He's known for Mike Hammer, Private Eye, and all that too. And I got to sit there and say, my initial take on this film is this: unless you're hardcore fans of these two, or you want to see something different, or you want to get a taste of what like Mad Max is, or some of these Australian films that just feel different, then this movie may not be for you. But for me, I enjoyed it. It's not one that you're going to constantly rewatch, but I think it does a solid enough job of acting as a thriller and basically delivering what it's supposed to at the end. And it's kind of like a Hitchcock film, the way it feels a little bit, and
Yeah.
that's intentional. So it's not bad. And yes, it was a box office bomb. Did not do well because it was marketed as a slasher. That was the in hot thing in the late 70s, early 80s. And unfortunately, again, it's probably studio misrepresenting it to try to cash in on it, because it's not horrible. It's certainly no Terror Train, which might be more the slasher area that people might like. But I thought this film was okay. I had no problems with it at all. And the fact that it was Australian made it a bit more watchable to me with the scenes and the backdrop and some of the shots in here, which we'll talk about shortly. What's your take on it?
Like I said, it was very Australian. You can tell right away. There's a scene in there where he comes across his bar in there. He stops in there. And there's a guy playing a pinball machine, and on the pinball machine right away, this is a Playboy pinball machine.
Oh, yeah.
And the guys are drinking bars, and everyone looks Australian. So it's very authentic. This movie, I didn't realize it, but at the time, this was like the biggest budget they've ever had for this movie here.
Yeah.
Like for Australian film, and over like what was it, 1.8 million or something, or 1.
And that's from way back when.
Yeah. And then after I just got done watching this, I was reading up. I was like, dude, they originally wanted to get Sean Connery for it instead of Keach, but they couldn't afford him. Like, imagine how different this would have been. Like, because Sean Connery is a different character, different animal when it comes to acting.
Yes.
Stacy Keach is still good though. But overall, I just like watching. I'm just thinking like, oh, it's 1981. I'm just looking at this. He's driving on the on the right side of the cab, the passenger side. I'm like, it kind of took me out a little bit. But overall, I kept thinking back, like I've seen this before with Convoy, or Convoy was the other movie with the rubber ducky. We've seen like Hitcher and stuff. It kind of reminded me of like Highwayman almost a little bit, with Jim Caviezel. A guy's going around and he's trying to stop him. Except that this guy has only a semi truck. There's some cool scenes in here where he basically rides the semi truck over the green van, to crush it. But I mean, like overall, it is the killer's going around. He's using a steel wire.
Guitar string, sir.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty much. It looks like a steel
Because
wire.
hippies would always carry an acoustic guitar. Is what they're trying to say.
Yeah.
And gorgeous women would sit there, get picked up, and and instead of seducing them, he strangled them, and then did disgusting things that we're led to believe, because the killer would dispose of the body parts here. But what's interesting when you say that, and I'll say this: it's a simple setup in that Keach, just while sleeping with, and his dog's in the truck with him too, he just kind of happens to notice this stuff by accident. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. He's just like an average Joe that gets caught up in something that you wouldn't believe, and that's kind of half the film, is him just driving down the road and seeing the guy going, okay, what exactly are you up to? And he meets some people along the way that may or may not believe him, including, of course, Jamie Lee Curtis, who's very young in here and very stunning. You can tell she's learning to feel a lot more comfortable in her skin and acting as the female lead. And you get Stacy Keach the opportunity to just sit there and talk. Because
Yep.
this guy is so good. He has such a natural charisma. And he has the ability of not overpowering a scene where when he comes on, he's going to overtake it like a Jim Carrey or something. He's one where he can just find the right level to be at with the other actor or actress and just kind of pop them and let them shine a little bit. And I think sometimes just them driving along their own while he's explaining what's going on with the serial killer, Jamie Lee Curtis, and we're going, wait a minute, is Stacy Keach a serial killer? Is it going to be Jamie Lee Curtis? We
Yeah.
don't know. Um, it's really good chemistry. I mean, it really is a nice little bit of acting back and forth between them.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that you mentioned Hitchcock, because this is basically like the Patrick, making the film Patrick, Richard Franklin basically gave Everett de Roche a copy of Rear Window, as example, how he wanted the script typed. And so that's basically desire to write a film similar to a pop up on a moving vehicle. So basically, is Rear Window, yeah, on a semi truck,
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's why. I mean, I still haven't watched Rear Window. I own it. I want to watch it. I just haven't had time to find time to watch it. But overall, yeah, this is very 1980s culture stuff. Culture. I mean, we always talk about when we did Kicking It. We talked about the Chuck Norris movies.
Yep.
The settings are on this, and it's basically they're in Melbourne, Australia. I love the old 80s, vehicles. Just the way we lived back then. Before all this internet stuff, before all the smartphones, before all this stuff, if you wanted to call someone, you had to drive either to a bar, hope they had a phone, or you try to find a payphone. There was no, I'm pulling my cordless phone with antenna, Don Johnson. No, you basically had to find a coin operated phone or a phone that with an operator, because these are older phones in the 80s. So I mean,
Don Johnson sees those assets. It's called civil asset forfeiture, and now they'll take anything. Damn it!
So this, they had a budget of like over $1.8 million, and the box office was $100,000. Wow, I can't think of another movie that's bombed bigger than that.
Well, when you say bomb, we'll close with this: is that obviously when you have the rights to the film, you can obviously get distribution rights too, and saying they got some money from that, so they didn't really necessarily turn a profit. So there's ways of making things look worse than what they are, but it's again a negotiation when you have an Australian film, but then they don't want to pay Sean Connery's salary, but then the American people who put some money into it, they want to have an American in it, and it makes sense too, because
Sure.
back then for a film like this to get the rights, it's kind of a big deal. And Stacy Keach was starting to come into his own now. Jamie Lee Curtis was, the hot, young, up and coming next big thing sort of thing in terms of females. And so it kind of works because at this point, we don't know what either one of them were going to end up being, which is massive and huge. And they're both still around today. Obviously, we here on Xtreme Movie Show, we just covered Halloween Ends and the whole trilogy. We've talked about Jamie Lee and other movies. And Stacy Keach, like I say, we just don't talk about enough. The man is he's a phenomenal actor, and he's one of those guys too that I want to sit there and say is that, to your point about the technology in here, you feel like they're isolated, but yet with Stacy Keach, he just seems like a man's man, and he's somebody that no matter what kind of trouble they're getting into, he can get himself out of it or at least put up a good fight. And that's one thing I like about it, because at the end, when they go to discover what's happening with the killer, is he being set up? We still don't know at the end. And then when we get the reveal at the end, what's happening, you're like, okay, I can buy it. It's simple. There's not much to it, and it's certainly not a deep film.
Yeah. So what's really cool about this, they're playing "What's My Line" while they're driving in the semi truck.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, that's kind of cool. And that's also dated. What's My Line was a big popular show there in the 50s into the late 60s. Real fun show. A lot of celebrities. And then the guy who actually ends up being the killer at the end, Grant Page, worked. Guess where he worked on? Mad Max. He was popular and stunt coordinator. So he worked mostly during the 70s and the 80s. But his other big movie was The Man from Hong Kong, 1975.
Yeah, and again, the whole idea of Australian films, they're a bit different. You definitely get a taste of the culture when you're watching it, but it seems like a long road with barren landscapes around it. It's an ideal setting, and while we might have Route 66 or other movies like
Yeah.
Breakdown with Kurt Russell, which was pretty fun. There just seems to be a certain amount of charm in the Australian versions, even the very first Mad Max, which does not feel like the second or third one, but they're still damn good. And other backwards country ass ones that still are produced today in Australia, some horror movies and whatnot too,
Yep.
are pretty good. There's just a different taste to it, and that's one of the things you'd get with this film. So I will say this, for my final thoughts: check it out. There's some great shots in here. You definitely feel like you're there, and all that. And there's not a rush in this film to get everything in. But again, it's a thriller. There's not a lot of action. There's not necessarily a lot of gore or typical 1980s boobs and sex and that kind of crap. It's just straight up a very mild, decent acted film. I think it's a good film,
Yeah.
but it's obviously not well received. But I enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty good. I can't find too much fault with it. What's your final thoughts?
Final thoughts. If you love dingoes, this guy's got a pet dingo that rides with shotgun in the semi. Also, this movie is available free to watch on Tubi TV.
Yes.
So that's where I watched it. And other than that, though, like I said, like if you like big trucks, hitchhikers, and murder, and a good mystery, this is
Murder,
it.
Mayhem, and Mystery.
I mean,
Stacy Keach and
the
Jamie Lee Curtis.
tagline for this movie: the truck driver plays games, the hitchhiker plays games, and the killer is playing the deadliest game of all. Road games.
All right, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Roadgames, 1981. Stacy Keach, Jamie Lee Curtis. Check it out. It's also free, not just on Tubi TV, but also on the Internet Archive. Although Tubi TV it will have a better print, and I'm sure it may be available on some other streaming services as well. So check it out. Let us know what you think here on the Xtreme Movie Show. We'll be glad to take a look at that as well as anything else that you have if you certainly request it. I'm Rob for RDB. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. As always, stay extreme. Xtreme Road Games.